now available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door takes on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed, all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis, Revenge of the Cyber Goddess featuring a bonus pin-up and the other 2 books in the Cyber Goddess saga at online bookstores everywhere today. One of my viewers wanted me to do a review of Milestone Returns Icon and Rocket Season 1, Number 1. Now, this first issue of Icon comes after the flagship launch of the Milestone universe with Static Number 1, and I was not really impressed with Static Season 1, Number 1 due to Vita Ayala's incredibly bad writing. Now, this Icon and Rocket issue has a little bit better writing, but that's not saying much because in this story by Reginald Hudlin, Icon feels like dollar store Icon and not like the classic character Dwayne McDuffie wrote back in 1993. Now, the reason why your Icon feels like dollar store Icon in this story is because Reginald Hudlin pads out the story by adding his own story elements that really don't fit organically with the character. Now, in the original Icon Number 1 by Dwayne McDuffie and Mark Bright, we got a couple of panels that showed us that Icon's ship was in peril, and while these panels really showed the action, they did so in a great way that really showed us that the passengers were actively out here dealing with this peril, and that made for a much more compelling story. Now, in Icon and Rocket Season 1, Number 1, everything is presented in a really passive fashion by Hudlin, who says that he was heading home when it disappeared and all of the passengers were asleep. And that really takes us away from the action of what happened in the 1993 Icon. And your Hudlin is doing this to try to introduce a new villain, talking about the weapon was hidden inside of them. It was a shape-shifting terrorist who wanted to kill everyone on the ship. And while it's a nice try to bring in a villain as related to Icon, it really messes with the story and really takes us away from everything, because this whole passive approach, it really does a lot of damage, as I see it, to the Icon character's origin. One, because DMZ from the Blood Syndicate was also on that ship, and DMZ was core to the Blood Syndicate. So I wasn't really happy with them talking about this shape-shifting terrorist who wanted to kill everybody on the ship, because now we know that Blood Syndicate will not be forming, because DMZ, again, who comes from the League of Planets that Icon was a part of, is not on this ship, and with DMZ not being a part of this whole story, this Milestone universe does not feel like the real Milestone universe. So this whole retooling of Icon's origin, I really wasn't happy with it, especially talking about this terrorist. This is just not something I was happy about. And then they talk about there was someone who saw the terrorist, and this really contradicts what was going on in the story, because if everybody is asleep, then who saw the terrorist? That's the critical question I want to ask, because, again, in the original Milestone universe, DMZ was a space cop, and Icon was the passenger. So it's looking like they're trying to merge your DMZ with Icon, and it's just not really working organically as I see it. And it looks like Reginald Hudlin's attempt to put his own spin on the character to try to make him look more like a hero. It doesn't really work, because it takes us away from who the character really was. So they changed his origin on the mothership, and now after he's dealt with the terrorist, everybody dies, and then he has to go and save himself, and he gets in the escape pod. And while technically it's the same story, it just isn't the same story. I mean, when he started changing story elements to fit his own, and he changed Augustus Freeman's story and changed him from being a hero that was working at the side of DMZ, trying to help others get off the ship. And that really throws off the overall course of the story, because the original story was supposed to be about the alien who became Augustus Freeman and others getting off the ship, and this story just does not really work. Now, the story really starts to mess up because we really start to see them really downplaying the whole aspect of Icon and Slate and him winding up in the field in 1839, and it just does not really work overall. Now, as the story goes on, we move to the present day, and we start to see other story elements that don't work. Now, your Raquel Irvin, if she's supposed to be a part of the 2000s and is a teenager, she wouldn't know what a typewriter is. So anybody who was born in the 2000s, they really wouldn't know what a typewriter is. Now, somebody in the 90s would know because they were born in the 70s, but this flies over the head of Reginald Hudlin, who really does not think about this story because he's caught up in his emotions about Milestone, and he wants to make these characters into big time superstars so that he can go out here and license and merchandise them, but he's not really taking the time to work on those story elements that really can connect us to the characters and make us care. Now, Raquel wanted to be a writer, and if anything, she would want to have a laptop, and that would be the thing that would motivate her to join the group that participated in the robbery. Unfortunately, instead of keeping things general, your Reginald Hudlin tries to go into details without understanding the context of time. Now, as somebody who understands the context of time, I understand that you wouldn't be looking for a typewriter. A person who was a part of Gen Z would not be looking for a typewriter. No, they would be looking for a laptop, and that's what they'd be looking for if they want to be a writer. So they say that, oh, she doesn't want to be online, but again, she wouldn't know what a typewriter is because that's something that kids that age would not know about, because that's a different invention. It's like a kid knowing about a Walkman. They just wouldn't know what that was, but they want us to believe that she would know what this is. Now, as this story goes on, they're trying to make things look like the old Icon, but it just doesn't work because they try to make it look like, oh, Icon it had a mansion and it's in a bad neighborhood, but that's never been part of the story as related to Icon. Icon lived in a really nice suburb, and he lived far away from the inner city of Dakota. So here we have some story points that really show that your Reginald Hudlin, again, does not know the character. He wants to sit there and say, oh, it used to be a nice house, a mansion, but Augustus Freeman is a successful attorney, and he would live in a very nice part of town because he was making lots of money, and he would have several aliases to be able to continue to show that he would inherit this money and build wealth. So he's trying to make things fit into his ideas, but it just winds up not really coming together cohesively. He retells the Icon story and tries to add details, but the details don't really flow organically like they did in 1993, because your Dwayne McDuffie had a better understanding of history, and he had a better understanding of the context of history as related to black people. And that's what is one of the big problems with this story, is that your Reginald Hudlin really did not do enough research, and he wants, again, caught up in his emotions about making these heroes popular, but he's not working on the technical aspects of storytelling that would make things compelling. Because if you look at Icon #1 from 93 with the break-in, what made it compelling was the fact that Icon was out here, and he was one, dressed in the red, black, and green that foreshadowed him becoming a hero. And that was one of the things I missed about this book, was the little subtle nuances as related to the 93 icon, because in the 93 icon, there were a lot of little things that made the story great. It was the little things as related to the story that made it compelling, but your Hudlin doesn't understand the nuances of storytelling that your Dwayne McDuffie and Mark D. Bright understood as related to storytelling. They didn't understand that it was little things that made that story really stand out, and it was little things that made it work. Now, another pet peeve I have about Icon and Rocket, number one, is that it takes them longer to go out here and get these characters to the whole stage of being a hero. Now, your Dwayne McDuffie and Mark Bright do this all in one issue, but your Reginald Hudlin, he wants to make this a season and pad things out similar to the way your Brian Michael Bendis did with Ultimate Spider-Man. So he wants to try to pad things out for 6 issues. And in the first issue, yes, Raquel comes back to Augustus and presents her images, but we don't see them suiting up to become heroes. No, we get expository sequences about your Augustus Freeman in 1921 with his wife, and that's really interesting, but save that for a later story like I did with Isis Imitation of Life, to show that Augustus was a hero, but he did things in a different fashion due to the dark days of Jim Crow. So there's a lot of elements here that could have worked. Unfortunately, due to Reginald Hudlin's execution, things really don't flow the way that they should. I mean, he's trying to pad things out into 6 issues, but we're really not seeing this really come together effectively the way that it came together in the first issue of Icon. Now, the first issue of Icon was extremely well put together, extremely well written, and manages to condense the story in a way that makes it compelling in 22 pages. But this Icon and Rocket relaunch, it really is an extremely shallow and underdeveloped story, and it really does not give the reader the whole story and the layers and the depth and the nuances that you got in the 1993 book. So I can say that this book is a little better than Static, because Vita Ayala is just making a mess on that book, and I will be talking about issue number 2 of Static, which is just absolute garbage. But this first issue of Icon, it just is a little bit better, but the whole thing is, again, it feels like dollar store Icon. It does not really feel like the character. It feels like somebody from an alternate universe, and what's really sad is we don't get to see that diversity of thought. Everything is just so flat and two-dimensional that we really don't get to see Augustus being the black conservative. We really don't get to see how he lives in a completely different part of town that shows contrast as related to your Raquel, who was living in the inner city. And again, all of those story elements are really missing, and that prevents the story from coming three-dimensional, because it's all those story elements that really made the Icon character great, was all of the different layers, and we don't really get many layers in this discount dollar store Icon. So I can't recommend this book, but if you want to go get it, you can get it. But it just shows me how poorly done this Milestone relaunch is, and how your Reginald Hudlin really does not get these characters, he does not get their story, and he really does not understand how these characters work mechanically, and it just shows that he's the wrong person to be in charge of this Milestone relaunch. Now, if you really want to get some truly great black comics, I recommend you head over to Concrete Comics. Concrete Comics has been knocking it out of the park with books like Acolyte. The Son of a Supreme really has a lot of depth and layers, and is a far superior character to Icon, and is presented in a way that really shows you a really strong image of black manhood. and black masculinity, and really shows you how the character could evolve and really take it to the next level. So if you want to see a really great character who is in the vein of Superman, I recommend you get Acolyte from Concrete Comics. It blows the doors off this Icon and Rocket, which just isn't up to par like many of the books in this Milestone relaunch. Now, if you want to help me get my comic, John Haynes, at Death's Door to publication, you can donate to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to check out my first comic, Easting No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for 99 cents on Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.